All right. Well, welcome everybody. Are we good? All right. So thank you everybody for coming tonight. I think you all know me. I'm Lisa Simpson Lutts. I'm the executive director here, and I'm going to be giving tonight's talk. But before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. I, of course, have to mention that next Wednesday is our summer fundraiser, and if you haven't gotten your tickets yet, please do so. That really helps us with our caterer count. And we've got invitations up here. Also, we have copies of the newsletter. Most of you here are already museum members, Historical Society members, so you've probably already gotten them. But if you're not a member, I encourage you to join. We also have membership brochures up here, and lots of great benefits, but this newsletter is really, really wonderful, and it's great to receive in the mail. All right. So the other thing I want to mention is our next big event after the fundraiser party is the Pulliam Lecture. And that is going to be August 8th at 7 o'clock at Delano Auditorium at MMA. And this year it is going to be the Boston-based architect and Castine summer resident Hans Strock. And he's going to be talking about the repatriation of his family's artwork that was confiscated by the Nazis in Berlin, Germany. So it's going to be a really, really interesting talk, and I hope you all can make it to that. So we have a lot to cover, and I promise you I'm not talking about 40 objects. I did have to reduce it to my favorite stories, which was hard to do, but I encourage you to see the exhibition. Let me see if I can use my fancy new clicker here. The exhibition is up through October 14th, so you have plenty of time to see it and procrastinate, but I encourage you to come often. So just how this exhibit came about. The exhibit, most people know the Historical Society has a huge collection of archives. Archives are paper. We have photographs, letters, diaries, maps, you name it, it's on paper. That is the biggest part of our collection. And I think we began acquiring archives as a historical society because we didn't have a home for a long time. And we were founded in 1965, and we didn't move into this building until 1995. So they were avidly collecting, but squirreling things away in their homes. So it's a lot easier to store paper compared to objects. We also have traditionally focused on our archives over our objects, but about 2 years ago, we started a project with a volunteer, Penny Carlian, where she began to photograph and measure and do the basic cataloging of our object collection. And as a result, we began to learn a little bit more about what we had and what we didn't have. And so that was part of the reason for the exhibit. And then also, as many of you know, eventually we will be renovating this building, and we will put in an elevator, and people will be able to go up to the second floor. And we will have an exhibit there that will be a permanent exhibit on the whole history of Castine. We will continue to have our changing exhibits, thematic exhibits. That's what brings people back over and over again. But we've had so many people ask us when they come, tourists, well, I want to know about the Baron Castine, or I want to know about Castine in the Civil War. And our temporary exhibits won't cover all those subjects. So this way, you can get the full scope of Castine's history. So what we did was we decided to do this exhibit, A History of Castine in 40 Objects, sort of as a trial run to see how it played out. Now the exhibit, we broke into themes, and the exhibit was organized by myself and the exhibits committee, and we worked together over the course of about a year. And we broke it into themes. So the first theme as you walk in is Castine at War. And here is Sergeant Henry Butler from Castine. That was the first section that you see. And we basically look at wars from all different periods, wars that were fought here and wars that were fought away by Castiners. So this piece, which sort of is about war. I mean, the Baron Castine, this was found at the Baron Castine habitation in the 1980s before the archaeology dig that was done there. And we all know that the Baron, he did like to fight. So we put this in with the war section. He often went with his native warriors and attacked English settlements. So he was a pretty fierce guy. This is actually, though, a religious piece. As you know, the Baron, most of you all know that the Baron Castine was French, and he would have had Jesuit priests as well as other priests coming to visit him frequently. It appears that this Jesuit priest lost a very important thing for him. It is his seal. It's called a chess piece seal. It's from the 1670s, and it is used to impress in hot wax if you were sealing a letter or a document. So this priest, probably when he would send off a letter, would need to put this particular seal, it's a Jesuit seal, onto these official documents. He probably was really mad at himself for losing it. But it was found and donated to us really early on, in sometime in the 1990s. It is our smallest piece in the exhibit, our oldest piece, and our rarest piece. This was borrowed by the Maine Historical Society for a big exhibit they did, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. Another tiny pieces are these rings. These are from the Civil War, and these were carved by Sergeant Butler, whose photograph you saw earlier. He served in the war for all 4 years, and went from private to eventually becoming a sergeant. He wrote back letters, 90 letters to his family. They lived in North Castine, off Neck, on a farm. And the family cherished those letters, not just because he was in the war, but because he died in the war. He really had an incredibly sad life. He managed to go through so many battles, including Gettysburg, and survived. And 1 month before the end of the Civil War, he had a bullet graze his shoulder. It didn't even go through. But back then, that's like a death sentence. And he did not survive. He died 1 month before the war ended. So the poor family, obviously, were just devastated. It was a young wife and their 4 or 5 year old son, whose name was Freddie. So these rings, he actually carved. They're made of bone, animal bone. We had to check that out because we just said bone. And occasionally they used human bone. But for the most part, the soldiers were using animal bones, like pig and cow, from things that they had eaten. And he carved these. He talked about them in the letter and said, "I'm sending these home to you and little Freddie as a memento." So the family held on to these. They were all donated with the letters to the Historical Society and are really, really precious objects. Speaking of the Civil War, so here is Dr. Wheeler. And most of you know Dr. Wheeler not only was the town doctor, one of the town doctors, but he also went on to write the history of Castine that we all use sort of as our Bible, written in the 1870s. And this is him wearing his Grand Army of the Republic uniform, which is a veterans organization. We're going to be talking about that in a little bit. He is right there on the Wheeler house is on the corner of Perkins and Pleasant. It's been recently renovated, and he is standing on the sidewalk, which now that it's been repaired, the sidewalk actually looks like that. Isn't that cool? So when the house was sold, and that was right during COVID, the family let us go in and rummage through the attic. That was really exciting for us, even though it was during COVID, right in the height of it, and we were all masked and worried and all that kind of good stuff. But among the things we found was this, and we thought it was his surgical kit, which we do know he used throughout his career, because hidden in one of the pockets was an envelope that had some really nasty looking needles in them. And then the envelope said Ricker's store. Now, Ricker was a musician, and his store was in the 1890s here in Castine. So we know he continued to use this when he would go and make house calls. But as we began to do the research on it, and we looked at the engravings on the instruments and also the look of the leather case, we realized would have been commissioned or given to him in the Civil War when he was an assistant surgeon. He was not from Castine at this time point. He was from Maine, but he was in the Civil War and served as an assistant surgeon down in Virginia and Maryland. So obviously took it home with him and continued to use it throughout his career in Castine. And we recently had that conserved. There were a number of pieces ended up going through conservation before they were exhibited. And hey guys, if you have questions, ask me. I'm open to questions, yes? Okay, so we have a conservator who knows how to take an object like that and clean it. It's basically cleaning it in most cases. In one case, you'll see we have a leather fire bucket where the handle was broken, and she was able to repair the handle. So she's a trained conservator who works part of the year down at the Birmingham Art Museum, and then she also lives in Mid-Coast, Maine. So we hire her for a lot of our projects. Okay, so this is another one that just doesn't scream war, does it? But it does have a story that relates to actually the Penobscot expedition. This very ornate chair was donated to us by Layla and Jim Day. It was carved by Samuel Noyes Jr. He is the son of Samuel Noyes from the Noyes shipyard. And Samuel Jr.'s job at the shipyard was to do the fancy carving on the ships that were being made here in Castine. So he would do the carving in the captain's quarters. He would do elaborate carving on the ship, any decorative carving. I'm sure he had other jobs, but that was his specialty. So obviously highly skilled, and after he retired, he decided to begin making elaborate furniture for his family. They lived also on Pleasant Street, just up from the Wheelers. And we believe this was either from around 1870 to 1889. He dies in 1889, so can't date any later than that. On the back of the chair, he carved St. Helena, 1779. And there's other carvings on the back of the chair, which is why we have it so that you can walk around and see the back of it. At the time when he made this, he actually thought, and everybody in town thought, that there was a shipwreck just north of the Noyes shipyard, and they pulled up the wood from it, and people began to reuse that wood for decorative carvings like this. They believed it was from a ship, the St. Helena, that was a British transport ship in the American Revolution. Okay, again, when you keep researching these things, okay, this was at the time in the 1870s, they thought it was from the St. Helena. Well, today we know actually couldn't be. The St. Helena survived the Penobscot expedition, went on to Halifax, Canada, and it was in Halifax that this ship was destroyed in December of that year, 1779. So it can't be from the St. Helena. We have other things in the files that say maybe it's from the Providence, which was an American ship. Can't be from the Providence. The Providence was destroyed closer to Bucksport. So why would it be down at the Noyes shipyard? So it's an example of the beginning of sort of an antiquarian interest in Castine, of preserving our history, but maybe not accurately so much. But it was this love of history that was definitely coming out when they assumed that this chair was from wood from a ship from the Penobscot expedition. Irregardless, the chair is phenomenal, and it tells a pretty cool story about what we learned in the time period. We also found a newspaper article from the 1870s that talks about finding the shipwreck. Yes? I don't. My guess is oak, because most ships were made of oak. I'm not a really good wood expert. All right, so let's see what we got next. Okay, Again, another piece that has been in the collection for a long time, that as we began to dig further, we discovered something completely different about it. So that is this sort of pedestal. Ooh, I forget. I have this. Ooh, look at this. Yes. It's this piece of furniture that is on this cute little pedestal that was made by Mark Pelletier. This we had always called a pedestal. However, the pedestal is this high. I am standing in front of a pedestal, aren't I, for talking? And as we began to research further into the Grand Army of the Republic, which is a veterans organization for men in the Civil War, and Castine had a post. Now, the picture on your left is actually not Castine. That is just a generic photo of guys at some GAR hall somewhere. But you will see they are around this same kind of piece of furniture. And as I read more and more about the Grand Army of the Republic, I kept thinking, I think this is called an altar. And we then sent the photo and the measurements to 2 different GAR museums in the country, and they came back and said, no, this is called an altar. So altars were used in the post for elaborate ceremonies for the induction of the men into the post. So, for instance, as you see here, they're all sitting around this altar. In a ceremony where you would be inducted, they would be standing around it in a semicircle. You, as a new inductee, would come up to the altar, which would have the post Bible on it, and on the Bible would be 2 crossed swords. You would put your hand on those 2 crossed swords and Bible, and you would pledge allegiance to the United States and to your post. So really important ceremonial function. This one probably was, this altar I'm sure was made locally. It's really interesting to see all around it because it refers to the fact that our men not only served in the Army but in the Navy. I think it's on the other side. There's something that I think anchors. So that's kind of interesting as well. So that really changed our whole concept of what this item is. Above it, you can see the beautiful embroidered eagle that we think was in the GAR post. So our post was formed in 1883. It was called the Charles Stevens Post. It's remained active until sometime in the 1920s when, at this point, all the veterans had passed away. And so the post closed. However, Town Hall, and they were meeting eventually, once Emerson Hall was built, that was where they would meet. And they had a room there. And all these items like this is Charles Stevens, this was his official portrait. These were all in the meeting room, and when we opened up as a historical society, the town donated all these to us. Okay, so this is another fun story, is the fruit bowl. And again, one where as we kept digging and digging, we found more and more information. This silver fruit bowl was commissioned in 1893 by the town of Castine to give in a ceremony to the gunboat Castine, that was an ironclad or steel-clad gunboat that was built at Bath Iron Works. So in 1893, there are 2 gunboats built at the same time, the ship Castine and the ship Machias. I guess both towns found out about this. Both towns wanted to have big multi-day ceremonies. They wanted the ships to come into port, and they wanted to do a lot of stuff, including giving a present. And what you gave to a ship was a punch bowl, not a fruit bowl. You gave punch bowls. Every ship has regimental silver, as Mike Boucher will tell us, who's in the back, who knows. And so this was commissioned in New York City. It's got engravings on it that kind of have faded over time a little bit, but that's the seal of Castine right in here. And on the other side, there's references to Fort Penagoet and also to the incorporation date for town. So Machias luckily had their big ceremony first, and it made the national news. And in the description of the event at Machias, when they donated a punch bowl to the ship Machias, the national press had a field day. The reason is because in 1893, Maine had been a temperance state. I mean, we didn't abolish selling alcohol, but we were the strictest state in the country. And so they made fun of Machias for giving an alcoholic punch bowl. You know? I mean, because it's alcohol. You're not putting Hawaiian punch in here. So Castine, very smartly, all of a sudden, we're giving a fruit bowl. This is a fruit bowl. You're going to put bananas in this, aren't you? And apples. And I have to say, for the ceremony, national news, the national papers picked it up, and they had a field day. They said, oh, yeah, a fruit bowl. Yeah, sure, it's a fruit bowl. But we are sticking to our Castine guns, and we call it a fruit bowl. And I want to show you the picture on the left. You may wonder what this picture is. So this was in our archives. And how did we get this punch bowl, fruit bowl? See, we keep going back and forth on this. So in the mid-1980s, and again, we don't have a home at this point. We're just an all-volunteer organization. A family gets in touch with Gardner Gregory, who was our president, and said, we own this fruit bowl. And he's like, how could you have gotten the fruit bowl? We thought it was destroyed. So when the ship Castine was decommissioned, all of the regimental silver was given to the USS Chicago, a different ship. And the USS Chicago was at Pearl Harbor. Now, they didn't get destroyed at Pearl Harbor, but they did have to start realizing they were going to go to war. And this is the part that we're kind of like, oh, really? So supposedly, they sold all their silver. I'm hoping that's what happened. Either that or the family stole it. We're not really sure now, but at the time when the family came to us, nobody questioned it. But supposedly this was because the ship Chicago was going to go into battle. They got rid of all their silver. And indeed, the ship Chicago went down and was completely destroyed, and all the men were killed on it. So the town of Castine actually believed that the bowl had been destroyed. So here's the 1980s, and what this family said was they bought it at an auction in Pearl Harbor at the time of World War II. His father had bought it, and it had been in the family all this time, and they wanted to sell it back to us. So they raised, the Historical Society raised the money and brought it back, and so much hoopla, lots of stuff in the press. We obviously, as the Historical Society, had a party. And it was obviously Christmas, because you can see the little Christmas holly here, and here's, all the little finger food. There's a crock pot, there's your can opener, your Tupperware. This was at somebody's house. This is your, not avocado green, what was the other color? Harvest gold. Your harvest gold, everything about this is just, even the plants. And I just thought it was so funny that they just stuck the punch bowl right there on the table. Luckily, it doesn't look like they put anything in it, no dip or anything. So that was the big celebration from the Historical Society, and I felt it had to be documented in the exhibit. Here is the ship, the USS Castine, right here. This is Willis Ricker's ragtime two-step that he created, Salute to Castine. Ricker did some really marvelous ragtime music, and this is just one of them. And this is the invitation to the event. After the ceremony, when the fruit bowl was given, they then went to the brand new Pentagoet Hotel for dinner, which I thought was just so cool. Brand new. It was just opened. All right, fast forward to World War II, and this is Sergeant Woodrow Bateman, also known as Woody. A lot of people, older people in town, remember him. This is his World War II uniform. He was in the Signal Corps and served in many campaigns. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. We have all of his medals here, his sergeant stripes. Here's his photograph. And this is this incredibly tiny uniform. We actually bought a male mannequin to put it on. It wouldn't even come close to closing. So we quickly revised and got out our female mannequin and put Woody's uniform on there. He was a teeny little guy. He was probably 18 at the time. So another World War II story about Castine. Dr. Alice North, she had studied to be a surgeon and a doctor and did practice for a while in the early part of her career. But then she moved to her family home, which is North Star, which is at the very end of Perkins Street. It was Carolyn Punzelt's house. It is Carolyn Punzelt's house. So Dr. North, during World War II, she decided she wanted to open a convalescent home for British seamen. And we have a letter where she was writing to the ambassador to Britain with her idea, and he agreed. And it's still a little odd that she somehow focused on England. But it worked. Maybe she knew somebody in the embassy there. We're not really sure how that all came about. So for about 3 or 4 years, men who needed rest would come to her house here in Castine. They would be about 6 men at a time at her house. She just made their life so wonderful. When they arrived, they would have their photograph taken in their uniforms. They would have to fill out this form here where it was their name, where they were from in England, what his rank was. Pretty much that was it. And then before they left to go back to their ship, they had to write a poem. And so it's pretty interesting that these hardened sailors are writing poems to her. Mostly to her. They called her Doc, and she was just beloved by these men. Dr. North had no children, and so when she passed away in the Penobscot nursing home, we were given all of her archives, and these are amazing. We get emails from England, from the kids and the grandkids. Oh, gosh, why do I tear up? So it's really fun to be able to scan this and say, yes, we have his picture, and we have a poem that he wrote, and they're just like a poem. So it's really been a wonderful way for us to give back to people in England. And I mean, Dr. North was just an amazing woman. I think probably some of you might have known her, maybe. Yeah, Elizabeth. All right, Castine at Sea. So we have a big section, obviously, about Castine at Sea. This is one of our star paintings. We purchased it at auction. It is the ship Castine portrait from 1881, and it was painted by Bazzi Ivanovich in Trieste, Italy, for the owners of the ship Castine. It had been sold away at this time. It was no longer owned by Castine residents, but it is still a ship that was built here at the Neuss shipyard, extremely important ship for the history of Castine. So we were thrilled to be able to purchase this at auction. We have a number of ship captain portraits in the exhibit. This is Captain James Hale. The Hale House is where the Buchanans live now on Court Street. And Captain Hale, really amazing story. So this painting was done in probably 1819 or 1820 in China. He was one of the early American ship captains to go to Canton, China, which you see here on the left. And on this multi-year voyage, what he did was his ship, which was actually from Newburyport, he himself was from Castine, but he was commissioned by a Newburyport ship, the ship Anne, Brig Anne, to go on this voyage. They sailed around Cape Horn, went up the coast, west coast of California, well, what would become California, into what is now today British Columbia. And there he did trading with the native peoples who were living there for fur. You'd then take the fur over to Canton, China, where it's highly valued. You can then sell it for exotic goods from China, like China, silk, things like that. And every ship captain who goes to China is going to have his portrait painted. You're just not going to come back without that portrait. So sadly, and we own his logbook, his logbook is very unusual. It's more than longitude and latitude. This one in particular, and it's the piece that we have open, and I encourage you, if in the exhibit, to read it. This whole section talks about an Indian chief who came on board while he was in what is now today British Columbia. And this chief talked to him about the tribe's, what happens when a chief dies. Very detailed, very much a social history of life of this tribe in the 1819, 1820 time period. So it's really a gold mine. The other thing that's really fascinating is that on the way back, unfortunately, he dies. And no one knows how or why. It was never handed down. That information was never handed down by the family. And that section of the logbook has been ripped out. And he did put down a mutiny early on in the ship log. So the first mate gives to Hale's widow this portrait, all the goods that he had purchased for the family. So the family got a lot of china, a lot of silk, and gave the logbook to her. And to this day, they really don't know how he died. They know when he died, but not how. So it's a little bit of a mystery. Now, not so mysterious is Captain Devereaux. He was on North Castine ship captain. He did not live in town. The Devereaux traditionally lived off neck. And we were able to purchase at auction this portrait. You know, big difference. You know, this is folk art as compared to the beautiful portrait of Hale. What's a lot of neat things about this. One, this is his ship. He was part owner of the schooner Murray. And this schooner was not for transatlantic voyages. He was what's called a coasting captain. So he would take probably lumber for the most part, and he would go down to ports, you know, mid-coast, like Baltimore, but he also went to Cuba and one of the Caribbean islands. But for the most part, he was going up and down the American coast delivering lumber. In addition to buying the portrait, we were able to buy his spyglass and his sextant. And this is the spyglass that you see right here. So it's pretty cool. And we've been able to document, this one in particular has all of the material about where he purchased it and the time period, because all the manufacturer marks are on here. So we were able to really date it quite closely and know that he bought it in New York City. Okay, he was mostly active. The portrait's from 1838. So we believe that he bought the sextant sometime in the mid-1830s. Not everybody was a ship captain. There were a lot of merchants, and Elizabeth will recognize this. This is Henry Whitney Jr. He was the oldest son of Captain Henry Whitney, whose house is next door to us, where Ganilla lives. And Henry did go on a voyage as a young boy, like a 13-year-old, with his father, and must have hated it. Because he never went to sea again except when he was going overseas to Liverpool. So as a young man, he decides he's going to move to Liverpool, England, where there are, you know, that was one of our biggest trading partners overseas, was Liverpool. And he opened a ship chandlery and a sail loft where they made sails with another man, and made a lot of money and did very well for himself. And in the summers, he would come back to Castine and stay at the Whitney house. And when it was ready to retire, he moved back also and lived in the Whitney house until he passed away with the other family members who were living there. He himself never married. So this portrait was recently donated to us by the family. So steamboats, that's, you know, bringing it a little more contemporary. That's about as contemporary as Castine gets, right? On the left, you see the steamboat Frank Jones, and you see oops, oh, sorry, sometimes I miss this. You see we all know where this is on Perkins Street, this boathouse. Doesn't it belong to the Rogers? Yeah. So this is what their boathouse looked like. Probably, let's see the date of this. So did I put down the dates? I didn't. It's in the 1890s. The Frank Jones did not actually serve in Castine and the Penobscot Bay for very long, like over a 7-year time period. So consequently, we have a ton of souvenir china of the Frank Jones. So we can date this china because it's here in Castine Bay. I mean, it says Castine, Maine right here. And on the back side of one of these is a drawing of Dice's head. So we do have a section that talks about the importance of steamboats. This was the way to travel before roads were really good up here. And we have a lot of steamboat china. I guess that was a big thing to buy when you were, you just got off the Frank Jones. Yeah, buy a little teacup. They would have gone to Belfast, Bangor, Castine. I'm not sure if and yeah, local, yeah. But eventually, the steamboat gets sold to Long Island, and it leaves, which is not the case on most of the steamboats that were here in Castine. Okay, so then we get into Castine at home. That's the next section of the exhibit. And this was, in some ways, this is my favorite piece because when Penny started doing her work and I went down to collection storage and I looked at this and I thought, oh, for God's sakes, why do we have this? It's a stick with a lantern on the end of it. And then we opened up the accession file because we keep files on when things are donated with what is it. And they said, campaign torch. I thought, what is a campaign torch? So again, it opens up this whole realm of new research. It turns out, before social media, when you wanted to promote your political party or your candidate, you would have parades in town. And here is a picture of a parade in town. It's a daytime parade. We have ascertained that this was during the McKinley presidential race. And they were big things to do. Men, and they were all men, no women, were really loved to put on parades to promote their candidate. Nighttime parades, however, were extremely popular in the 1870s and 1880s. What would happen is that especially the younger men in town, the 18 to 30-year-olds, loved to march in these nighttime parades for their political candidates. They were often extremely elaborate, and they would carry much fancier lanterns than this, ones that were actually clear on the outside and had images around them. So they were like magic lanterns, and you could see an image that would promote your candidate. But many of them had these more simple ones. This was found in the home where Ellie lives, Ellie and Doug Benjamin. This was in your house, in your attic. And it was given to us by a donor who had purchased it at the estate sale of the West family when they left. But I talked to the antique dealer who sold it. He said, oh yeah, it was way stuck in the back corner of the attic. It had been in the house. It didn't belong to the West. So that meant it was from the Johnston family. They were a multi-generational family that lived in that house until about the mid-20th century. Time period-wise, in the 1870s, the Johnstons had two 20-year-old boys, perfect age to be marching in a parade. And then as we dug further, because we were just recently given a huge cache of Johnston family papers, so I started researching the family, and I found this. S.P. Layton and Company, this is a Boston, he's in Boston. S.P. Layton was the uncle of the Johnstons, and he's selling campaign torches in his Boston store. So my guess is that that's probably where the Johnstons got this campaign torch for a parade. So that, a very simple piece, and this huge story comes out of it that relates to Castine, so it was kind of neat. Okay, here's the fire bucket. I had mentioned that this had been damaged over time. It's from 1821. And one of the leather handles had broken. And so the conservator repaired it, and you can't even tell that it's been repaired. It's pretty amazing. Leather fire buckets, every house had these. This is dated 1821, and it says Benjamin Hook. And the Hook family were among the founding families here in Castine. And when you're fighting a fire in 1821, you have this state-of-the-art engine, and this is the Castine engine that you now see at the Wilson Museum. And this photograph looks so funky, it's almost like early Photoshop. But that is the engine that you see over at the Wilson Museum. It was the first engine in Castine. It's a hand pump. This would be filled with water. You fill it with water with these leather buckets. These leather buckets, as a fire breaks out, and the volunteer firemen are running past your house, you throw this bucket at them so that they have enough buckets to fight the fire. And you have your name on it because at the end of the fire, it has to be returned to your house. You're supposed to keep this in your hallway hanging from a hook. And you would keep it filled with sand because fire was a big deal. And so in your house, there's a high likelihood you're going to have a small fire, and you use this to help put out that fire. So it's like an early fire extinguisher as well. This was donated to us by Philip Booth. His family descend from the Hooks. Yeah, little known fact, right? So another interesting piece that we have in the collection comes from the Custom House. So on the right, you see the post office. A lot of you probably have seen this picture before. It's probably from the 1870s or 80s. And on the second floor of the post office was the Custom House for Penobscot or Castine. It was called the Penobscot Custom House for a long time. We were the regional custom house for the area, which meant it was bringing us a great deal of wealth. This meant all the ship captains have to stop here in Castine and pay a custom duty. This is what custom houses look like. This is the Salem Custom House. I just wanted to put that in there so you could see what they look like. This is the desk that comes from the custom house. And this was taken from the second floor. When Irene Bowden was the postmistress, she was told, empty everything out of the second floor. We don't want this junk anymore. So she contacted Philip Booth and Clark Fitzgerald. And there must have been other people, because I can tell you, when we moved this thing, we hired a moving company and it nearly killed the men. So I don't know how Clark and Philip did this. This does come apart in two pieces, but I can guarantee you it's not easy. So they brought down 6 of these, and the Booths still have theirs. Clark Fitzgerald and Liddy gave us this one, and we don't know what happened to the other 4. I'm sure they gave them away to somebody, and somebody's they knew. So this would have been in the custom house, been filled with paperwork, because that is exactly what a custom collector did. He was a paper pusher, and this would have been part of where he did his work. So as you know, we've done a lot of research on the African American community, and this gave us an opportunity to show this very rare piece on the right, which is the lantern that Mary Jackson was carrying on the evening that she died. This is Mary Jackson. She was a 14-year-old orphan who was brought into the Whiting family in the Whitney Whiting house next door. She was always a servant, but she held a very special place in the family. Here is the family portrait. She is sitting with all the family. She's in a very elaborate black silk dress. She just had a very interesting family, not family situation. But she basically lived with them from the age of 14 until she passed away, probably from a heart attack when she was in her mid-50s. And this lantern, which is engraved with her initials and the word Castine, has been handed down in the family multiple generations until it was recently donated to us. Noah Brooks, and we're getting now into Castine in the arts. This is the last part, so we're almost done. Noah, as you know, was a famous writer from the 19th century, specialized in children's books. And on the left is a scene from Fairport 9, and it shows the Castine team playing baseball in Fort George. His books are all sort of semi-autobiographical. Veiled references to real people are in all of his books. And here you see John, who is in reality, this is John Jackson Jr. He is the eldest brother of Mary Jackson. He was an exact contemporary of Noah Brooks, and they would have gone to school together. And John Jackson played on the integrated Castine team. And this is in the book called Fairport 9. George Ortman is probably the most famous artist that has ever lived in Castine, in my opinion. He was in the 1950s and 60s in New York City, really making a name for himself as a contemporary artist. And then he decides to move to the Cranbrook Art School, where he was the head of the art department for the remainder of his life with his wife, what was her name? Mrs. Whidden. I'm sorry, Roger. What was her name? Mrs. Whidden. Connie. Right, yes, Connie Whidden. Roger is seen here on the right playing chess with his stepfather in their house, which is, again, off neck. So we purchased this piece on the right.
See the portrait in the corner?
Yes, right?
It's by Alex Katz.
Wow. Wow. Is Roger, I'm assuming Roger still has that, right? But yeah. George, if he had stayed in New York City, would have been, I'm sure, on the par with the big artists, Jasper Johns and a lot of the mid-20th century artists who made a big name for themselves. I think he's lesser known because he moved to the Cranbrook Art School. This piece on the right is called Skyline, and it's from 1995. And we purchased that recently at an auction because we felt it's really important for us to have at least one example of different artists' work as well as literary works. Folly Theater was on Water Street. This was our movie theater. It was not a grand palace, as you can see. A lot of people jokingly called it the Tar Paper Shack. And it is where Mary Kniesel's, to the left of her house, it is an empty lot. It was torn down in the early 1960s. It had stopped being used. It was in really rough condition, and so it was torn down. When it was torn down, Doris Russell, who we all know is a great hoarder and gatherer of historic items, she saved these two seats from the theater. They did not look like this. This is another piece that we have had conserved. And really cool, we found that it had this gorgeous gilding on the end cap there. The movie theater was really early, 1915. This movie theater opens, this building in 1915. And it was a summer theater. We own these two documents. This one on the right was an MGM report from 1941. I love it. It says it was on Main Street. That's wrong. It's on Water Street. It says our population is 662, that we're an MGM theater, built in 1916, that's wrong, 1915, and poor condition. Boy, yes, I think it was probably in pretty poor shape, as you can see here. So that's kind of a fun document we have. Almost done here. We've got Philip Booth's typewriter. He was one of our most important writers who lived here in Castine, along with Robert Lowell, who both you see in this. Here's Robert, and here is Philip Booth. There's Clark Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Hardwick, and this is Philip's wife, and this is Clark's first wife, whose name is Leah. Thank you, Leah. So this was given to us by Todd Nelson, who had been given it by Philip Booth. And so we have this on display along with his poem, Eaton's Boatyard. So very timely. We'll end with Baron Castine. We have a whole section on him. This is our portrait of him. It's a 20th century copy of the original that is at the Witherley Library. And then we were given this really cool Victorian tray that shows the marriage of the Baron to Pidianeschi, or Mathilde, as she's called in her French name, with a Jesuit priest who probably lost his seal while he was doing the marriage. Whoops. So that is, and we have some china that shows the Baron. So what's missing? I'm going to end with this. One of the things we learned was where are the gaps in our collection. The biggest gap is Native American. This is a 1940s basket made by a Penobscot basket maker that was donated to us. But we really have very little to tell the story of the Native people here in Castine, in what we now know as Castine. And so this is an area we need to work harder on because we will be working as we organize the exhibit. We will be working with probably the Penobscot tribe to make sure that we're telling that story and they are telling that story, not us. So we have a long way to go on that aspect of our collecting and our interpreting. So maybe 40 objects. I've got 10 till. You've been very patient. Any questions? Like, no. Well, good. Well, yes. Mm-hmm.
Are there any sites here in Castine that are candidates for an archaeological dig?
There have been, yes. Yeah. Well, actually, yes. The only place that has not had an archaeological dig at Fort George is the parade ground, which is the center. They did some really not very good archaeology in the 70s, well-meaning, but not very well done, and very few reports, and they did all 4 bastions, but they did not do the parade ground. But, you know, archaeology today is phenomenally expensive. You would have to have obviously the University of Maine would have to do it. So that was one area. The Barrens habitation has been done. Fort Pentegoet's been done and done very well. Those were both very well done. I don't know, maybe some of the little outer forts like Fort Griffith, they'd be interesting to do. Catholic Church, yeah. But the Fort Pentegoet was done there, kind of. Well, yeah. So you never do. You try not to do the whole thing. I mean, it's hard to do the whole. But you're right. There's probably areas of Fort Pentegoet that still could be done, and around that. Mm-hmm.
Do you have the book by Alaric Faulkner on
We do. Yeah, we do in the collection, and I would imagine the library does too, if you wanted to read it and take it out. But yes, we have their reports. A lot of their reports are online too. So if you wanted to read an archaeological report on like the Barren habitation, it is online.
Wasn't that done in the
80s, late 80s. Yes. It's on the Bagaduce River. So the Baron, when he married Pidianeski, they created a sort of mixed village that is on the Bagaduce River. It's now private property. And it was Native Americans living with the Baron and his family. I don't exactly know where the title Baron's habitation has come about. Why habitation? I know it's a kind of weird word, but that's how we call it. But it's on private property. Yes, he did. Yeah, they in the archaeology they were able to uncover a French-style house, as opposed to the native dwellings that were there, and a truck house, which is where you would do your trading. That was like a trading post, and that was mainly what he was doing. He was trading and making a lot of money. Off neck. Yes. There we go. Très bien. That makes perfect sense.
Where along that shore would it have been? I know it's across from.
It's at the end of the coves, where the river.
Right, Hatch Cove.
Yeah, it's all Hatch Cove across the way, but I'm always curious.
Yeah, you know, truthfully, I've never been, so I don't know, and I think it's probably better I don't know. I mean, it's kind of important to preserve, and we don't need a lot of people poking around in it.
I walked around there.
Yeah, you've walked around there. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Way in the back.
Have you poked around most of the attics in town? Any attics left to go?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure pretty much if anyone lets us in their attic, we'd be happy. But a lot of the attics have changed hands. So, you know, but you're right. There may still be things in your attic, so please go look. If you find some little weird, like, thing and you go, well, this doesn't look important, you please do bring it to us.
Interesting sort of aside, when we were redoing our house, we were told our house is not that historic. It's turn of the century, maybe more
Oh,
And
why?
so
That's a little scary. What, the Castine Mafia?
guy that owned it back in the 70s, actually 60s and 70s, had stowed some guns.
Oh, okay.
And so when they were doing, ripping out, we have a lot of paint in our insulation,
Huh.
which was quite dangerous because it
Yeah.
had dried up.
Yeah.
And so we had to get all that out, and then digging into the guns, we found a bunch of old toys.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is amazing what ends up in people's walls. Sometimes they're placed there purposely by the builders, but I think a lot of times, there's gaps in the ceiling and stuff, and things fall down and end up in weird places in houses. So did you have a, yes?
Representing Noah Brooks for his writing and his
Yeah, yeah. But his art.
connection,
Yeah.
political connection with Abraham Lincoln.
Right. So Noah Brooks was slated to become the private secretary of Abraham Lincoln just prior to Lincoln's assassination. And then he'd become a very close family friend way back, even before Lincoln had been elected. And Noah Brooks was a reporter. That's really what he did for a living. He worked for newspapers and that's how he got to know the Lincolns. And he went on to write an early biography on Lincoln. So yeah, and he also was an artist. We actually have in our collection about 30 or 40 watercolors that he did on his travels. So really interesting man.
The library has a document with a doctoral thesis about his life. Very good.
That's since been published. Yeah, and we do sell the book in the, it's called Lincoln's Confidant. And we have it in our gift shop up there. And yeah, so if you're interested, that would be a good read. All right, everyone, I know you want to head home. Thank you so much. It was great having you.